This may be the ultimate discard deck. I'm already a field marshal, so it's a little hard to prove, but I think this deck could easily take you to field marshal rank with an 80 to 90% win rate. I call it Card Havoc version 6. The main nation is Germany for the powerful discard cards. The secondary nation is France for some supporting discard cards, as well as guards that are necessary to keep your HQ alive against rush decks and other forms of HQ pressure strategies. Starting off, we have 2 copies of the ARADO. This is an excellent card that helps block bombers, fire on light infantry in the early game, as well as maintain your card advantage because it can draw an order when you play it. I understand that this card is a little expensive, being a special card, so let me suggest some cheaper alternatives. The 738 Jaeger Regiment is good for cheaply cleaning up rush decks, as well as maintaining your card advantage through draws. It's only a limited wild card, so it's cheaper to include in your deck. Next up is Through the Breach. Bring 4 of this card. There's no excuse not to. It's only a limited wild card, so you can quickly buy all 4 copies. This card is vital for cleaning up all the cheap units from rush decks, as well as sniping pesky single units in the enemy's support line. It pairs well with other destroy cards and is one of the cheapest and best removal cards in the game. Bring the maximum available, U375. We've now come to our first removal card. It's only 2 credits and can help you open the game by discarding some of your opponent's cards. This is a discard deck, so naturally it's a must-bring. It's only a limited wild card, so there's no excuse. Buy and use all 3 copies. HEINKEL HE 115. This is a gold card that will soon move to the reserve pool. The main role of this bomber is to snipe weak units with 1 damage, as well as maintain your card advantage with draws. It's a gold unit, so I understand that's expensive and difficult to obtain. Here are 2 cheap alternatives. One is the HEINKEL HS 123. This card snipe weak units similar to the HE 115. But it is a special card, so it may be difficult to get into your deck. It also doesn't draw a card every time it attacks, so it is a little bit of a downgrade. The H39 SWG is good for sniping and suppressing units, and can replace this card. It's only a standard card, so you can easily pick those up. You can also just use a Spoils of War, or a Pack 40 as you want to replace it with a draw card. 51st Regiment. This is our first French card. It is a must-have for this deck, so buy all 3 copies. It's extremely versatile. It can guard your HQ or even push into the front line with an optional blitz command. This is what makes this deck so powerful. While you're discarding, you can use this card to push into the front line to maintain pressure, or use it to block your opponent's attacks on your HQ while you fire off orders. It's honestly a little overpowered, so I wouldn't be surprised later if the card is toned down or removed. In the meantime, buy and get it in your deck at all costs. REICHSBANK. Bring 3 of this card. There are a lot of expensive orders in this deck, so you'll need the credits to pay for them. This is a must-include. REICH RESEARCH. This is a gold card, so if you can't afford it, just bring along an extra tactical strike. I use this card for removal most of the time anyway, but it is extremely flexible, so if you have it, bring it. Tactical strike. Bring this for removal. It's a must-have. Call to the colonies. Bring all 3. You don't have many ways to strengthen your headquarters, so this deck will quickly fall apart if you don't have it. If you're feeling really safe, you can also use it to draw cards. JU 87 B STUKA. This is a key unit in this discard deck. Most of the time you won't use it, but when you do it, nearly guarantees you a win. Every time it fires on the enemy HQ, they have to discard a card. So as you can imagine, as soon as you play it, it demands a response. Oftentimes, this Stuka merely appearing forces your opponent to drop everything they are doing and try to remove it. Your opponent will often burn twice as many destroy cards as the cost of this Stuka just trying to get it out of the way. So think of it as an indirect discard card of your opponent's cards. The minimum to bring, I'd say, is 2, but if you can't afford the other gold and special cards I talked about before, bring 3 of these instead. WOLFPACK. This is a special card, but it's a must-have. There is no alternative, so spend your entire special card budget on these 2 cards. You won't regret it. They can remove powerful enemy units regardless of their defense, and also they discard the enemy's cards like crazy. This deck is built around the WOLFPACK, so sacrifice everything else to get these cards. Do not build a discard deck like this one if you can't get both WOLFPACK cards. Case yellow. Bring 3. It discards your enemy's cards and makes your units attack stronger. It's a limited wild card, so it's not expensive. Deuxième RMT. This is the best French guard unit in the deck. I understand it's a special wild card, so if you need alternatives for guards, try the 2nd Rima or 43rd Motorized Regiment for defense instead. Admiral Hipper. This is a gold card but more optional. It's good for sending enemy units to their hand. You can combo it with discards to remove single enemy units that are giving you a headache. A cheaper alternative is the Panzer IV F2. It can retreat enemy units in the support line back into their hand, so this tank can play the same role as Admiral Hipper. Sabotage. This card is a must-bring. It's only a limited wild card, so you have no excuse. Buy them. The good news is that this deck already does so many discards that you only really need to bring 2. If for some reason you can't afford both WOLFPACK cards or Annihilation, you can bring 3. The danger of this card, though, is that if your opponent doesn't have 3 cards, you can't use it, and it's useless. As you can imagine, if you're already discarding a lot, you might hurt yourself and make this card useless. Only bring 3 if you can't afford or are missing other discard cards. That said, it's extremely powerful. It discards an enemy card and gives you a copy of that card, helping your card advantage. Be extremely precise and make sure you choose enemy cards that are vital to their deck's gimmick. For example, if you see a Retribution-based unit in an American's hand, remove that. Or if you see an Ambush Fury fighter in a Japanese rush deck, choose that instead. You'll get the hang of it once you see all the gimmicks in this game. There aren't that many. Eventually, you will get a second sense for what cards are key to the different gimmicks in this game. Sabotage will be your best friend. Annihilation. This is a special card, so it can be very expensive, but it's also not a must-have. If you can't afford them, bring extra Sabotage cards instead. They're the same price. But this is a discard deck, so consider prioritizing this card over other normal units. Discard decks don't work without discard cards. ME 262. This is a gold card, so it's not a must-have. It's just really good for saving yourself against air and bomber decks. As soon as you play it, it destroys all of your enemy's air units. If you can't afford it, expect to lose a little more often against enemy air decks, but that's okay. I think the other aspects of this deck are so strong you can afford to go without it. For alternatives, consider replacing the ME 262 with a FW190A or a Sky Barons card. Both are cheaper basic cards that pretty much do the same role. Leopold. This card is gold but worth getting. If there is any single gold card I think you should get, it would be this one. It sends all of your opponent's cards back into their hand, where you can discard them. If your opponent is flooding the board with too many units for you to deal with and destroy, it can help reset the board and give you breathing room. I can't tell you how many games where this unit has saved me. If you absolutely can't afford it, consider replacing it with another Panzer IV F2, AFW190A, or an 88mm flak, depending if you care about the artillery attributes of the Leopold, or its ability to retreat enemy units. There you have it. That's how you build the ultimate discard deck in cards, along with cheaper alternatives to replace the more expensive ones. I truly believe this deck is viable against all other decks in a way that single gimmick meta decks aren't. For example, if you're playing a rush deck, you'll quickly learn that some decks just totally counter you. The beauty of the discard deck is that it's equally effective against all other decks. That's because all decks are damaged when they lose key cards. Whereas, if you're focused on expensive bombers, for example, there's not much you can do against fighter-heavy decks or rush decks that can destroy your HQ before you have time to build up your credits. I truly believe this is the best deck in the game because most people have 1 or 2 key gimmick cards and build their deck around them. Most people don't play balanced decks and rely on their tactics and skills on commanding individual units and establishing board control methodically. Instead, they have a few key cards that are designed to quickly destroy your HQ. If they lose those cards, they usually just immediately surrender. You'll see how this works. Let's watch a few example games with this deck. You'll see how it deals with every possible type of deck in the game. This first one is an American frontline deck. I beat this one without discarding a single one of his cards, instead relying on the blitz function of the 51st Regiment and the strong lineup of destroy cards. I use the V1 bomb here, but the same thing could be accomplished with a suppression or tactical strike. These frontline decks can win the game sometimes in just 5 turns, so the power of the 51st Regiment really shines through. I take the front line very decisively, and he's forced to burn all of his cards just to free up the front line. Once I take it again, that pretty much ends the game. His gimmick failed and he gives up. The 51st Regiment is good at pushing back against these frontline decks, but once you take the front line, don't push too hard. The point is to hold it. You only have 3 of these cards, so the 51st Regiment can't single-handedly win the game. Take it slow and just maintain your presence in the front line. This one is a Japanese rush and salvage deck. Through the breach comes handy in making sure I don't get overwhelmed by cheap attacking units in the opening moves. There's my first discard already. It's only turn 2. His first push has failed, so he's guarding up. I know he has some kind of discard gimmick coming up, so I move into the front line to pressure him. He takes the bait and spends his credits reacting to my 51st Regiment. I never intended to attack with it, but instead use it to project danger into his support line. Call to the Colonies is absolutely vital against Japanese decks. They love to damage and pressure your HQ. Sabotage single-handedly wins the game. All 3 options are cards absolutely vital to his gimmick. Once he sees I have the chance of interrupting his credit loss bit, he gives up. This one is an American Overwhelm deck. It has no single individual gimmick card, but instead relies on endless waves of cheap units, backed up by frequent draw cards. This discard deck, though, is equally capable against this strategy. You'll get to see the Stuka B in action and how it can single-handedly win games. Once again, you see the versatility of the 51st Regiment. He clearly has the unit advantage, so I use it to guard up, rather than blitz into the front line. The goal of his deck is to overwhelm me with cheap to medium strength units. He hopes these will soak up my destroy cards. Don't be afraid to use them anyway. This deck has more than enough destroy and removal cards. First discard of the game. He loses strategic bombing, which was a huge blow. That card could have wiped out my support line. On top of that, my U-boat discards his other destroy card. He doesn't have much to threaten my support line anymore. I can now shoot at the endless waves of units he's throwing out with safety. There's the Stuka B. Watch this. Sabotage takes away his last dangerous removal card. Through the breach removes his artillery. Stuka B discards his follow-up rush unit. Case Yellow takes away his emergency draw card, and the second strike with my Stuka B discards his last card. He has absolutely no cards left, and I control the board. Because of discard, he was absolutely crippled. Normally, he relies on those draw card Sherman tanks to help maintain the tempo of his assault, but those were sadly discarded. So instead, his deck stalled out with no cards. Lesser decks would have folded against the endless waves of infantry and tanks. This one is an American Boom, Retribution, and Heavy Air deck. It's an extra exciting game that is up in the air until the absolute last moment. We both stall out and end up in a long drawn-out tit-for-tat at the end. Deck composition is crucial here. He has the advantage because of his heavier units. Technique, though, is enough to overcome the material advantage of these heavy boom decks. He plays a boom card trying to increase his credits, so I know I have to pressure him. I choose Blitz for the 51st Regiment. He sees this and guards up. That's fine with me because I need him to focus on reacting to me rather than saving up credits to put out heavy units. The 51st Regiment gives me the front line, and my Stuka works away at discarding his cards. So far, my discards haven't been very lucky. It only discarded some mediocre infantry he uses to distract his enemy while he builds up his credit count. If he has a high credit count, he can quickly wipe me out with these retribution cards. I get very lucky here and discard one of his biggest sources of retribution cards. My ARADOs do their job and help me maintain my card advantage. but he now has the front line. Admiral Hipper helps me delay his retribution cards for another 2 turns. I steal his B-17. That would have devastated my cards. Sabotage lets you use your opponent's strengths against them, situation permitting. A lucky case yellow discards his strategic bombing. I need to discard as many of his cards as possible. I don't want him firing off retributions. It doesn't work, and he builds up 2 retributions. I pay the price for it and lose 2 units. However, WOLFPACK, a crucial card, discards his retribution infantry without triggering its destruction. No more retribution cards for him. That's why it's a must-bring. However, this little win is overturned when he pulls yet another retribution card. He feels so confident he holds on to a spare retribution while he floods the board with units. On top of that, there's a Manhattan project waiting to destroy anything I manage to put down. He has a card advantage and I'm stalling out. Leopold doesn't retreat many of his units, but it does get him to burn one of his destroy cards. Here you see the ME-262 in action. It helps get rid of his air units pressuring me and makes him burn another removal card. I love this French guard. He needs to use both Manhattan projects just to destroy it. My Reichsbank and U-boat card is useless at this point, so we're equal in cards. He's run out of cards, though, and eventually loses to overdraw. Very close game. You can see, though, even without dramatic luck, you can still overcome meta decks through technique and consistency.